In the last devotional, we talked about the actions Jesus took against specific cases of injustice. But the journey to justice is longer than just a response to a single injustice. The journey towards justice is a day in, day out journey. This, too, we see displayed in Jesus' life. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered in leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. This story is miraculous and revolutionary. The miraculous part is the last sentence, and immediately the leprosy left him. But we are going to focus on the revolutionary part. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. This is revolutionary. Lepers were segregated from society. Their leprosy made them unclean, and to touch something unclean would make you unclean. So lepers were pushed to the outskirts of society in order to keep society clean. This uncleanness was not just physical, it was viewed as a religious uncleanness as well. We know from other stories throughout the Gospels that Jesus did not have to touch to heal. Jesus chose to touch this man with leprosy. Jesus chose to break the social and religious segregations of the time so it could bring about not just physical healing, but social healing as well. Jesus wanted the man to know that what society used to drive him away does not make him an untouchable within society. Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him, and Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to the sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance." The last two sentences of this passage make it an obvious example of Jesus' desire to bring about spiritual healing. But it also makes it easy to brush over the social implications. Who you ate with was incredibly important in this society. There was generally very few crossings of social levels when it came to gathering at the table. For a rabbi, to eat with tax collectors and sinners was to raise the social importance of those that society has systematically pushed down. This was something Jesus continuously did and which became a core component in the Christian movement. Luke writes of the first church, "They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people." Jesus valued equality. Jesus refused to not associate with people whose society had devalued. Jesus intentionally associated with the socially marginalized and the outcasts because he wanted to communicate that they are loved by God and they should be valued by society. Jesus' daily life was full of socially revolutionary actions, and Jesus sought to teach others to do the same. An expert of the law tried to test Jesus by asking, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus turns the question back on him and asks, "How do you read the law?" The expert correctly responds, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus responds with a parable, and to summarize it, a man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was overtaken by robbers. They stripped him, they beat him, and they left him there for dead. A priest was walking down the road, saw the man, and passed by on the other side of the road. A Levite also came along, saw the man, and passed by on the other side of the road. Then a Samaritan came along, saw the man, and took pity on him. He treated his wounds, he took him to the inn, and he asked the innkeeper to take care of him until he returned. Jesus asked the expert of the law who was the neighbor of the man who was robbed. The expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Not understanding the culture of the time causes one to miss the severity of this parable. Samaritans and Jews hated each other. This was not a mild dislike. This was a full-on despise for the other. We see this hatred even in Jesus' disciples. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. The Samaritans refused to welcome Jesus because he was going to the Jewish city of worship. And out of generationally learned hatred, James and John thought it would be a good idea to destroy the city. Hostility and hatred and oppression between people groups is not new. It is something we see again and again throughout history. Jews and Samaritans, Hutus and Tutsis, white Americans and black Americans. The unjust dehumanization of God's children is a continuous and repeating evil, and it is an evil that Jesus rebuked. So when we come to Jesus' parable describing who a neighbor is, we see Jesus cutting through the social divides of his time. Your neighbor is everyone because everyone is a child of God. Your neighbor is not just the people you like. Your neighbor is the people you have hated your entire life. Your neighbor is the person you have oppressed. Your neighbor is the person you refuse to associate with. Your neighbor is the person you view as less than human. And how are you to treat your neighbor? You are to love them as you love yourself. You are to understand them as equal to yourself. You are to value them in society as you think you deserve to be valued. Jesus' parable invites us to place ourselves into the story. Across the country, we are being shown our neighbor. Our neighbor has been oppressed for hundreds of years. Our neighbor has been beaten and killed and devalued. Our neighbor has been denied the justice that God demands. Will you reach out your hand to touch them? Will you sit down and eat with them? Will you refuse to cross over to the other side of the road and instead use your resources to show them that they deserve to be valued?